What's up, guys, and welcome, Daily Theologians, to a book summary or a short book review of Soundtracks, A Surprising Solution to Overthinking by Jon Acuff. Now, those of you that don't know Jon Acuff, he's best known for being a Christian satirist that then went on to write quite heavily in the self-improvement space. He worked at Lampo Group, aka Dave Ramsey. I was there for 4 years, not overlapping, but there is some shared understanding of business and entrepreneurship and things like that, and you can understand some of his perspective. However, one of the things that I always challenge when Christians write things that are not theological in their approach to work, I think it's going to be dangerous. And Matt Perman's book, What's Best Next, covers this well and says that a Christian worldview and view of work must start and begin with the gospel. So that's going to be a kind of a point in this review for you guys to consider. But the summary is meant to be helpful, and I do think there are very helpful things in this book. Okay, so I'm giving it a thumbs up in that regard, just not theologically. There are 10 chapters. I think I can do this. The choice is yours. Turn down the dial. Borrow from the best. Win the week. Don't fight. Flip it. Zig Ziglar your way to positive thinking. Put the new anthem on repeat. Gather evidence. Make a soundtrack. Stick with a simple conclusion. A lot of these chapters are filler, in my opinion, or at least for your purposes they will be, because I don't think you're going to need them. Now, I do recommend, if you do like the ideas after this review or summary, go buy the book. But I think a lot of times authors are trying to meet a word count or develop these ideas. And a lot of times the ideas developed in books like this are not necessarily answering the question any more in depth. It's just kind of taking you on a journey that's fun, but not necessarily helpful. So, hello, I'm happy. It's a trap. Spoiler alert. So, short summary for impatient people. The book has two main steps, delivered with the humor, of course, of Jon Acuff, which he is very funny. Main idea: overthinking steals your time and reinforces negative ideas. Work is something you do to serve others is still my main contention here. And he says that people put bad soundtracks on repeat. You want to remove the bad soundtracks and put the encouraging soundtracks on. Whatever is pure, good, and lovely, meditate on these things. So that is the main point of the book. I give this book a B- for tactics, not because they don't work. I actually think a lot of this is basically Zig Ziglar repurposed or repackaged. I love Zig Ziglar. I understand him. However, I never really loved the way he presented things without theology, and it's very close to Joel Osteen in some areas. If you focus all on positive attitude and no theology, what you get is people damned with their best life now. So, I love Zig Ziglar. This book, I think, is kind of like Zig Ziglar, Tom Ziglar 2.0, in my opinion. That being said, Christians have different views on common grace and how we should emphasize the gospel and the Bible as our approach to work and theology. Again, we're both at Lampo Group at different times, but I do have a grasp on some of these connected ideas and principles. Now, it's one of the things, I think if you're a believer, the Bible needs to be your ultimate standard and authority, but obviously if you're writing for a world that is secular about work and self-improvement, that's not going to be very popular. It's not going to sell well. And he started out as a very heavily Christian satirist and then pivoted to self-improvement. Well, what got left out is the theology and the clarity of how those beliefs connect. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't still have some of those beliefs or held those beliefs. It's just they're not in the book. But to the good points, I think we can learn tactically good things from authors and books like this. So overthinking is what you think when what you think gets in the way of what you want. And then do we all do this too much? Yes. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ. And that's 2 Corinthians 5:6. So the counter to this, the premise of this book that I believe is true, is 2 Corinthians 5:6, but it's not mentioned anywhere in the book. But it should be. How can... This is the problem with the world and the world of Christian influencers and Christian thought. It's if you're not going to be clear about what you believe, then it's very dangerous because the world naturally runs towards the opposite. So the big point, you can turn overthinking into action. You can use all that reclaimed time, creativity, and productivity to create the life you want. Start with recognizing your thoughts, what they are, a personal soundtrack for your life. Now, I underlined create the life you want because that is very much word of faithy, even if he's not word of faithy. I have a feeling he's non-denominational. I don't know for sure. But we were both in Franklin, Tennessee, and it's a very Baptist area. And so recognizing your thoughts for what they really are, personal soundtrack for your life, I agree with this. In fact, in a lot of ways, I have a lot of the same sarcastic humor that Jon Acuff does. And when you're always thinking quickly and about weird things and these different ways to view life, you could become very critical. And then you start to replay the negatives. And that is a huge problem, which is why I wanted to review this book, because I think if we replace those negative soundtracks with positive Bible, gospel-focused truth, I think it can be very helpful. And to meditate on what is pure, good, and lovely, to think the best. 1 Corinthians 13, love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, etc. To have that type of attitude and recognize that we do have negative attitudes a lot about people, and we need to be careful to take every thought captive. That's really why I think this book is helpful, because a lot of the premises in the book, in terms of the soundtracks playing, the two main points, they do apply to the Christian life, in my opinion. And it would have been very easy to connect these dots, but it's understandable why that would not be popular in a basically a secular book. The most important conversation you'll ever have are the ones you have with yourself. You wake up with them, you walk around with them, you go to bed with them. Eventually you learn to act on them, whether they be good or bad. I mean, I guess kind of. I think the fallenness of humanity plays a part in the way we act. But yes, it is also true. If you put yourself into the negativity that is culture, the evil that is culture, surround yourself with violent video games and movies and music, and it's going to influence you like a soundtrack to your life. And I do think that his comparison to soundtracks is very good. It's well thought out, and it is true, especially because we're always listening to different things. And I've often said what you allow on your bookshelf goes into your heart. And so you have to be careful the things that you read and pay attention to, but not just in a negative, like abstain from things sort of way, in a redeeming the time, in a redeeming these things for good, for the glory of God. It can be done. So I think that is a good point about the soundtracks there. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. Ephesians 6:12. This is true. There is a spiritual battle going on. Now, it's nowhere referenced in the book. It's just positive, negative. And I think Zig Ziglar is a nice guy. I think he had some more clear theology that he did devotionals on. In fact, I have one of them where you can tell he believes the gospel, but it's very close to Joel Osteen if left unclear. And I think anyone in the positive movement space, the self-improvement space, is going to quickly fall into Joel Osteen territory, which I would say is heretical. And so I'm not saying Jon Acuff is there. I'm just saying it is a dangerous space to play without the theological clarity of a Matt Perman who can delineate the gospel clearly and then connect it to work and why work is good. So I'm suggesting we load up on God's Word. This is not in the book, but I think it should have been. Your Word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path, Psalm 119:105. Have this be your soundtrack. Have the soundtracks in your life be focused on what is true, lovely, and good. To just tell people, create your own soundtrack. Well, what if I love like gangster rap? What if I love violent songs? What if I love songs that denigrate women? Wait, what if that's my soundtrack? I'm good? As a Christian, we're supposed to speak the truth in love, and I think the gospel needs to be the core of every message, every book, and the undergirding theme, because ultimately Jesus is the truth, a standard of right and wrong, and anything not based on that standard, especially from a Christian perspective, is going to be wrong. Like, there's just no way around this. And, you know, people don't think theologically because maybe perhaps they haven't been discipled, but with Acuff, I don't know his personal story, but his dad was a pastor. I know that. He mentions that quite a bit. So, I mean, I would assume there was correct theology in the Acuff home. Super problem to superpower. Think about this. There are 3 actions to change your thoughts from a super problem into a super power. Retire broken soundtracks. Replace them with new ones. Repeat them until they're as automatic as the old ones. This is good. I actually think this is true. Replace the negative patterns about people and enemies and people doing wrong things with Bible verses that are true and good. Like the app Dwell, it's basically this idea of kind of taking those out and replacing them with things that are true, right, and good, and gracious. We should be gracious as Christians, and we should repeat gracious Bible verses and pray them and ask for more love for people and more patience and things of that nature. So that I agree with. Of course, none of that is in the book. It's just kind of create your own universe type of thing. 3 questions to ask yourself. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Why these questions? I don't know. I don't know where the standard for these questions comes from, but I do think these questions can be helpful because ultimately we're dealing with truth and lies, right? So here we ask, is it true on this diagnostic? But when it comes to, is this the right soundtrack? We don't ask, is that true? Is it helpful? We don't ask that of the soundtracks we're putting in. These are the things we're asking from our own perspective, but by what standard? And I think you have to put the Bible in there or you end up with a lot of confused, lost people again. So again, he talks about mindfulness. This is a Buddhist idea. Not a good idea. Terrible idea. This is an awful idea. Emptying your mind is a Buddhist idea. It's evil, it's satanic, and it's wrong. And Christian authors that do this demonstrate their lack of theological understanding and perhaps lack of discipleship, and it's a bad sign. And whenever you're trying to be very popular, and it's not God making you popular, like you're trying to hit a certain genre, you're trying to be a certain way, be accepted a certain way, it's going to be dangerous. Now, again, it's not a judgment on Acuff, but from my understanding, this topic should have no place in any Christian book. It's a terrible idea. When things don't go well, don't give up. Look to Jesus. I wrote this, the founder, the perfect life in your place, and begin again. He says, don't give up, begin again. And I agree with that. I think that's good. But I think putting in there, look to Jesus, perfect life, and subsequent death, burial, and resurrection in your place, and then begin again because you've been born again. I don't know how you can be an author. This is why this channel may never be very popular, are the things that I do here, because it's too black and white and it's too focused on truth and the gospel. And as a Christian, though, what else do we have if not the gospel? And how can that Jesus reigning and being the king and Lord of our life not impact the work that we do and the way we communicate about those ideas and truth and him to the world? So warning, this is not a theology book. While I do think there's some practical, helpful, tactical ideas, I would just say if you're not theologically grounded, this is a very dangerous type of book. I used to listen to and read a lot of these types of books before I was saved, and I wanted to get better, do better, be more, because I wasn't content in Christ. I wasn't born again. I didn't have a right standard of truth and right and wrong, and I think a lot of people are deceived in the American Christian evangelical space, and they're all for mindfulness. They're all for positive self-image. And all of these ideas came out of psychology and things that are not biblical. We want to think less of ourselves and more of Jesus. The solution to contentment and love is not thinking more about yourself. It's thinking more about Jesus, who is altogether lovely, pure, and good. He's the source of all good things. He's the giver of every good and perfect gift. He's the giver of eternal life. He's the perfect one that lived the perfect life in your place, died and bore the wrath you deserved, died and rose. And so, yeah, I think, but anytime I do a book review, if it's not theological, there's going to be problems, because you can't put out something and claim it to be true without basing it on the Bible, or it will just be untrue. So I think we can learn some tactical things from the book, but I would not necessarily recommend it if you don't have good theology, because this is a slippery slope into positive affirmation, word of faith, mindfulness, and potentially apostasy. If this is your whole focus, is improving your life instead of seeking to serve. There's no mention of serving. As far as I know, I should be careful with that, but as far as I know, it wasn't one of the chapter focuses to how to help with your soundtracks. It may be in there somewhere, but overall, just those are my initial reactions to the book. And I think Acuff's a very kind, very funny person, very good writer, and very good at what he does. The problem is, if I'm comparing him, I would put him up against a Matt Perman, and he would lose every time, because you can't have self-improvement without the Bible. And Perman is theological first. I think writers need to be theological first, and then try to help people from a common grace standpoint in that process. But you try to hide that because it wouldn't be successful. It wouldn't be adopted on a mass scale. And you could help people, but how can you help people when they don't need self-improvement? They need self-denial. That's the big problem with this whole category. Let me know what you think. I think fame, success, desire to do well is a very dangerous thing in this space. But again, maybe you could get some positive things from it. I think you could. Tactically, I would just be very careful with this book. But let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. And remember to hammer that like button, like the 95 Theses, and subscribe to the channel. God bless.